With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Chaf. We left off on Daf Yutes Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. It's a very important Daf today. We're going to spend a lot of time on Daf Chaf Amid Aleph. We're going to be touching on many foundational halachas that are connected to the laws of purity and impurity. And beginning with chulin, non-consecrated food, was treated, especially during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, by many people, it was treated as if it was holy food. In other words, people, whether they are kohanim, that have to be constantly up to date with and very accustomed to keeping the standard that truma has to be kept in, people that wanted to go into the Beis HaMikdash, even non-kohanim, and wanted to continuously make sure that they're not tamei, that they're eating kachim, they're eating consecrated food as one is allowed to only when they are in the state of purity, making sure that the food does not become impure inadvertently. And there are so many dinim regarding tum and tara that their solution was to treat their food, their chulin, non-consecrated food, as if it's kachim. These were called the people that would eat chulin al taras hakodesh. There is really a machloikis whether that approach, whether that hachlata, whether that higher standard of living has any halachic effect or not. Some are of the opinion, very nice that you eat or you treat your chulin as if it is kachim. Good for you. But it doesn't change the halacha of your chulin. Others were of the opinion that the people that undertook to eat chulin al taras hakodesh, their chulin actually became susceptible to the dinim of tum and tara like kachim. Meaning that if a person is a sheni, stam yodayim are shniyos, and they touch chulin food, it becomes a shlishi. And if it touches kachim, the kachim becomes a revi, as is the halacha of all other kachim. And we're going to see how, through learning our Mishnah and our Sugya, our Gemara takes a side in this argument, and indeed, as we will see, chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh, our Mishnah holds, gets the standard, actually has the standard of kachim. It could become actually tamei, of course rabbinically, all the way up into the level of a revi. That's going to be topic number 1. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Topic number 2, which is an equally important topic. There is something called hesech hadas. Hesech hadas means a diversion of attention. Hesech hadas means that when will something remain pure? Only if it is consciously and uninterruptedly guarded from it having any contact with tumah. If something wasn't constantly, and again, it's consciously and uninterruptedly guarded by its owner, that nothing tamei will have contact with it, it will lose its standard, it would lose its status of it being pure as far as truma and kachim is concerned. And that's the concept, that's the halacha of hesech hadas. And we're going to see many details about this concept of hesech hadas. What constitutes a hesech hadas? There's going to be a havamina in today's daf that if I am guarding an item from it not becoming tamei, I'm mindful about it, but I thought I have item A when I really have item B, that in itself is a hesech hadas. There's such a havamina that won't be accepted. There's going to be a concept in the Gemara called niterusa lapalga, guarding something only partially, as we'll see details, and really we already introduced this concept of partial guarding in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis, when one of the stringencies, which is called a ma'ala, a higher standard, midrabanan, that we learned in the Mishnah, is that if someone is a parush, and someone is being constantly careful for their garments not to become tamei, but if this person was only guarding it, let's say for truma, as far as kachim is concerned, it's considered tamei. That's an example of, is it guarded or not guarded? The person that's guarding it for it not to become tamei on the level of a shlishi will tell you that I know nothing that could make it tamei had contact with it. If it had no contact, then it's not tamei nekuda. But we don't say that. we're going to find other applications of this idea of partial guarding. And B'chlal, by learning the sugya, especially Daf Chav, we're going to become familiar with many details of the laws of Tum and Tara. These are not difficult to understand, but it's a question about gathering enough information for us to appreciate and to better grasp the sugyas that we are learning. So first of all, let's start inside. We left off on Daf Yutes Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The last topic that we had in this little Amid on Daf Yutes Amid Beis was when we were speaking about if someone Big Day Perushim, this concept that a beged that is worn by someone who's mindful not to become Tameh, but if he was not guarding it for Truma, it's a non-kohen, he was only making sure that it remains pure, then as far as someone who eats Truma is concerned, we have to presume the worst. And what's the worst? Not only is the garment of these people Tameh, but it's Tameh on the level of a midras. Just to explain what that means. There are certain people whose source of Tumah is because Tumah left their bodies, and that's going to be a Nida, and that's going to be a Zava, and that's going to be a Zav, that's going to be a Yoledis, that's going to be a Mitzoira. That if they sit upon something that's meant to be sat upon, or if they lay upon something that's meant to be laid upon, not only do they convey Tumah, but that item becomes Tameh on their same level. They are an Av, and that which they sat upon becomes an Av as well. With other Chumras, this is all Midah Eiraisa, even if there wasn't direct contact. The example the Mishnah gives, if you have 10 mattresses, and a Zav lays on the top one, all of them, even the bottom one, becomes Tameh on the level of an Av. Same thing would go, let's say, to shoes. Shoes is a Keli. A Keli in the dinim of Tumah and Tara doesn't only refer to utensils, it also refers to garments. They are called Kalim. Well, a shoe is meant for people to put their feet in, and it holds up the body weight. That's an example of a midra, something that's meant to receive the weight of the person who's Tameh. Shoes of a Zav become an Av. So if you have a person who says, I made sure that no Zav stepped into my shoes, fine. If he wasn't guarding it specifically for Truma, as far as Truma is concerned, it's considered a midras. Now, what the point the Gemara was making until now is that it appears that our Mishnah skipped the step of Meiser Sheni. And as we keep on mentioning that really we have 5 levels going from the lowest to the highest, from the least holy to the most holy meaning it is the least sensitive to Tumah. It can only become Tameh on a level of a Sheni. It cannot become Tameh on a level of a Shlishi. So we had Chulin, but we spoke about Meiser Sheni, Truma, Kachim, and Mechatos. When the Mishnah was speaking about this concept that if I guarded it only for a parush, but not for something higher, it's a midras for that which is higher, the Mishnah skipped the level of Meiser Sheni. Truth be told, we learned in the last year, quoting a Mishnah in Para, that really there's a machloikas between Avmeir and the Chachamim, whether we consider Meiser Sheni a notch holier than Chulin. There's a machloikas. But our Mishnah, that in the beginning did make such a step, when it spoke about the dinim of midras, it skipped over the step of Meiser Sheni. So the last thing we learned before we're going to continue is that there was actually those who had another version in our Mishnah, and the Mishnah added that additional step. In other words, the sugya we were being medayik, that why is it that the Mishnah Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis skipped? It only spoke out the general parush. From there it went to Oichlei Truma. From there it went to people who eat kachim, and from there it went to people that are dealing with mechatos. Now we're going to speak about another potential step that was skipped. What's that other potential step? So again, people, a parush means someone who was careful not for the person, nor for his items, nor for his food, nor for his drink to become tummy. There are many people that have no such obligation. If a person is a non-kohen and they don't plan to go into the Beis Hamikdash, they're not allowed to eat truma, they really don't have to make sure that their food is not tummy. People nevertheless did that. But it wasn't they did it or they didn't. To what level were they keeping? So if there's a person that decided to keep their items away from truma, the way kachim is kept away from truma, that's called people that eat their chulin al taras hakodesh. Like we mentioned in the intro, there is a machlokes whether that has an actual halachic effect on their food items. One opinion says no. It's a good training. So now that they become so familiar how to keep their food away from Tumah, they're going to be more secure with themselves that when they want to go into the Beis HaMikdash, if they're given kachim, that them and their families know how to make sure it doesn't become tummy. But the chulin itself remains chulin. The other opinion is no. If you decide to eat chulin al taras hakodesh, you rabbinically change the status of your food and it becomes susceptible like kachim does. So what is our Mishnah's opinion? Amar Rav Mari Shmami. No, learn from our Mishnah that chulin that is kept shenasu al taras hakodesh has the standard of kachim. Has the standard of kachim. Look inside Rashi, the second to last. Rashi to be the third to last, the second to last. Shenasu al taras hakodesh odim haragil lechol kachim. Person who wants to be able to eat kachim, or who eats kachim quite regularly. It was common, mekabel olav lechol chulav, on the same standard of keeping tara like by kachim. Why would people do that? The last line in the Amud and Rashi, kedei sheyu b'nei beisos zehirim ubikiyim b'taras hakodesh. Mashiach is coming. It's like Hilchas Shabbos. People that are already keeping Shabbos don't have a hard time keeping Shabbos. There are so many dinim. Well, you keep on reviewing it by living it. So the solution of becoming, of approaching the laws of Tum and Tara, one solution is make believe all of your food is kachim. So what now will have the standard? Says Rav Mari, our Mishnah holds it actually has the standard of kachim. Mimai, what's my proof? Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. Midoloi katoni b'hu ma'ila. Because we didn't add yet an additional step in the Mishnah. And like Rashi spells it out, why didn't the Mishnah say that big day Perushim, people who are not Amaratzim, or they don't want to become Tomei, they want to eat their food betara, ha'oichlem chulein betaras chulin. So for the higher level is a midras, is automatically considered Tomei on the highest level, and Av, for people who eat their chulin betaras hakodesh. Why didn't the Mishnah say that? The Mishnah says their clothing is a midras for people who eat kachim, not for people who eat the chulin al taras hakodesh. The fact that Mishnah didn't add this additional step is arayah that people that eat their chulin al taras hakodesh is mamash kachim. So the Mishnah already mentioned it. It's included in that step of for truma, and certainly anything under truma is considered midras for people that eat kachim. Counters the Gemara back inside the Gemara, the top line. No, that's not a proof, because maybe the Dilma, the reason why the Mishnah didn't add this additional step or this separate level is because maybe it doesn't have the standard of Kodesh, but we're going to learn other Tanoim from other places who held that it does become imbued with the standard of Truma. The Mishnah spoke about Truma. The Mishnah spoke about Kodesh. So the Mishnah doesn't have to go into this question. Whichever one it is, it's going to be one of the steps that are mentioned in the Mishnah. According to the opinion that holds that it has no halachic effect at all, so it remains chulin, the Mishnah spoke about chulin. In other words, actually what we see over here is really there are three opinions. Either that my hachlata, to treat my food as if it's kachim, has zero effect. It remains chulin with all of the laws of chulin. In our context, it cannot become tamei more than on a level of a sheni. It cannot become a shlishi. Can certainly not become a revi. Or even though that I behave with my chulin, I treat my chulin as if it's kachim. It doesn't get the standard of kachim, but it gets the standard of truma. The other opinion holds it gets mamish the standard of kachim. These three opinions, whichever one will be, is included in one of the steps of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah didn't have to mention it. And the Tanan, chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh, opinion number one, harein kechulin. Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Tzadik Oimer, this is a Tana, harein ketruma. So therefore you have no raya from our Mishnahs, or at least not from this part of the Mishnah, to which Rav Mari responds, you're right. I quoted the wrong part of the Mishnah to back up my statement, but my statement stands. Our Mishnah is of the opinion that if you resolve, this is not even a verbal resolution, this is an inner resolution, that I'm going to treat my chulin as if it's kachim, it upgrades rabbinically, and it makes my chulin susceptible to tuma mamish like kachim, and or it can make kachim tamei. That means if my hands are yadayim, stam yadayim ashniyas, and I touched my chulin, if not for me choosing to eat my chulin al taras hakodesh, my chulin will remain pure, because chulin cannot even become a shlishi. But since I decided, me and my family, that we're going to treat our chulin as if it's kachim, then the food becomes a shlishi, and if my chulin touches kachim, the kachim has to be burnt. Wow. Because the kachim became a revi. Now, by the way, just a little detail about the last statement that I made. We learned this a lot in kachim, that whenever truma or kachim becomes tamei only on a level of midrabanan, truth is you can't burn it immediately. Because burning truma and burning kachim, if it's tahar, biblically, is a problem. It's prohibited. But midrabanan, it's tamei. So what you need to do is you need to wait until it becomes problematic biblically, and then you burn it. Like by kachim, you wait for it to expire. You overnight it. Now it becomes noiser. Now that it became noiser, now you have to burn it. But let's go inside. But says Rav Mari Elami Seifa, my proof stands that when it says at the end of the Seifa, we gave two examples, that even someone like Yosi ben Yoezer, which wasn't just a kohen, he was considered a chassid amongst the kohanim. And therefore, he made sure that there's no tumah in his house. He made sure that none of his food can ever come near tumah. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, that his kerchief was considered midras av hatumei as far as kachim is concerned. That's one example the Mishnah gave. Then the Mishnah says, Yochanan ben Gudgada, who would eat hoya oichel al taharas hakodesh kol yamav. Yochanan ben Gudgada was not a kohen. Yochanan ben Gudgada, however, wanted, like Rashi said, Mashiach is coming, I want to always know whether I'm tamei or toid. I want to be confident that all of my family members know where they're at, toid or tamei. If they're not going to continuously practice the dinim of tum and tara, they might mistakenly think they're tar. So he was someone who made sure that his family treated all their food as if it's kachim. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, v'hoya mitpachtoi midras lachatos. What does that imply? That only for the highest, most delicate item, which is chatos, we're saying that means mechatos. For that was this kerchief considered midras av, but l'kodesh itself, loy. His mitpachas was considered pure for kodesh. Why? Because he treated his chulin al taharos hakodesh. What does that prove? That our Mishnah subscribes to the opinion that if you treat your chulin like taras hakodesh, it actually gets the din of kachim as far as tum and tara is concerned. Almo kasavar chulin shenasu al taharas hakodesh ke kodesh damim. Okay, sort of muddy stance, and we just clarified the source that he found from the Mishnah. Before we speak, before we learn three dinim right now, I just want to repeat the following. To appreciate the sugya, aside of the fact that we should mature into appreciating just taharas by itself, I want to propose perhaps a link we have in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Zayin, and the Rebbe wanted us to constantly learn the Torah of Geula and Moshiach, so it's good to become familiar with it. The Gemara tells us on Amud Aleph that Gimel Boyim Behesach Hadas. There are three things that happened. Behesach Hadas means when you're not expecting for it to happen. Moshiach, Mitzia, and Akrov. That Moshiach will come when we are in a state of Hesach Hadas. Or finding a lost item. People don't go around spending their time looking for someone for a lost item. At least most people are not treasure hunters. When you find it, like, wow, you were not expecting it, and boom, there on the sidewalk, you have $100. Same thing, getting bit by a scorpion. You got bit by a scorpion because you were not watching, paying attention. If you would be paying attention, you wouldn't have gotten hurt. But let's focus on the Moshiach. And it's very bothersome because we were educated to constantly be mindful about Moshiach, to be asking for Moshiach. We daven about Moshiach. Everyone speaks about the tefillas are filled with Moshiach. So when you learn in the Gemara that the Mashiach is going to come when we are Behesach Hadas, I think the solution, it's not a problem because our Gemara is going to enlighten the meaning of Hesach Hadas. We're going to learn, Hesach Hadas means the diversion of your attention, the diversion of my attention. I have to be focused and mindful in our context, guarding my item, making sure no source of Tumah touches it. That's called I'm mindful, I have Das. And if I have a Hesach Hadas, if I am not mindful, even though I don't know if something tummy touched it, and we're going to see how nuanced this is, then rabbinically it becomes tummy. Okay, so let's now learn this concept of Hesach Hadas, and the Gemara is going to tell us three dinim 3 rules, and we're going to challenge them, and because of the challenges, we're going to clarify and better appreciate the tremendous novelty of that which we are learning. Rule number 1, halacha number 1. We are quoting 3 Amoraim. Number 1, Amar Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar. Let's try to remember the names and what they said. So when we quote their names, we know the topic. Nafla ma'aforto heimenu. If you have a person, okay, let's just take one quick review. During the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, there were certain people that for whatever reason decided to become lax in the laws of purity and impurity. Truth be told, you didn't need you, if you're not a Kohen and you're not planning to go into the holy temple, if you're Tameh, it didn't change your life. It's like now we are all Tameh. We are all Tameh on the level of an Av. We have halachic contact with the corpse, and we can go about our lives fully observant. So many people, now when you go into the holy temple, then you have to go through a purification process. Say that. So then they spent a week, they got ashes of the red heifer thrown on them. But people became very lax, and because of that laxity, or because of their non-practicing and not reviewing the laws of Tum and Tara, so the Chachamim said, by default, we have to presume their tummy. Other people who are called, they were called the Am Ha'aretz, the commoner. The other one, the Parush in the singular, or the Parushim, people that kept away from Tumah. And sadly, it also meant they needed to keep away physically from the Am Ha'aretz. Because if Am Ha'aretz would come and tell you, hey, Shalom Aleichem, of course you should respond. But if you would shake their hand, then you would have to presume that you're tummy, because you are presuming that they are tummy. So the Purushim were those who removed themselves from the general society, and they made sure to stay on a level of Tara, without going into the nuance, which level, Tara, Truma, Kachim, just general Tara. I want to make sure that I know what's happening with me, and with my belongings, and with my food, and with my drink. So this Parush is wearing a ma'afarta, he's wearing a shawl. He's wearing a beged that you don't stick your hands through it, or you don't stick your feet through it, so it can relatively easily fall off you. A scarf, that would be a taich. So his scarf fell down. And instead of him picking it up, he told his colleague, Tonoli, please pick it up for me. And his colleague picked it up and gave it to him. Says Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, that's called Hesech Hadas. Boom! Tamei. Why is it Tamei? So Rashi really enlightens us. Look inside Rashi, 12 lines from the top. Va'afilu, even if the one who picked it up is Tahar. Even if the one who picked it up is not an Am Ha'aretz. The one who picked it up is also a Parush. Ulakaman mefarish time. Later we'll get the reason. So, but let's jump ahead a little bit. Chazaka ein adam mishamer ma shebiyat chaverei. Even if you are right near me, this level of mindfulness, making sure that no source of tumah touches me or my items, is only done when it's under my care, when it's in my hand. The moment something is in your hand, and I know you're a parush, so I am not guarding it. You can be guarding it, but I am not guarding it on that level. As we learn the sugya, we'll see, I'm not blind, I'm watching it, I see it. I see that nothing Tamei touched it. It's not enough. There's a certain type of focus. I have to make sure that no source of Tumah can touch it. And it's not so simple, because sources of Tumah are many. There are many, many dinim. If I don't have that level of guardianship, that in itself is called a diversion of attention. Now the question is, okay, I don't guard what's in your hand, but why may I not rely on your guardianship? Because in many cases, I could rely on your guardianship. So Rashi explains why that also won't work over here. Lefikach, who, the owner, I'm reading inside Rashi, lo shemara b'yad chaverei, wasn't guarding it on that level. The person who picked up my shawl, he didn't care to guard it. Why didn't he care to guard it? Because when I asked, let's say it's Reuven and Shimon, when Reuven asked Shimon, please pick up my shawl, he didn't verbally ask Shimon, are you tahar? He didn't ask him that question. So Shimon, who's doing the favor, thinks to himself, He didn't even ask me whether I am tired or tummy, which means he doesn't care. The Meimar Omar Kivin Sha'amar Li Tanali, since he just told me pick it up. For who Eina Yodeya, he doesn't know im tummy ani im tired, if I am now tummy or tired. Even if I'm known to be a parush, what do you think? A parush never became tummy? A parush can go to a lavaya and become tummy. He didn't ask me that. It means he thinks that Reuven doesn't care. So Shimon, for that moment that he gave it to Reuven, he wasn't focused on this level of guardianship. He picked it up and gave it to him. Now, guys, appreciate the novelty here. Reuven and Shimon are standing in the same place. There was nothing there. You don't have any tumah there. All that happened was Shimon picked up the shul and gave it to Reuven. Midrabanan, this is all rabbinically. Midrabanan, the shul becomes tummy. Wow. Because of the rule that ein adam shomer mashe biyad chaveroi, and because of the second rule is if I ask you to do something and I don't explicitly ask you, 1 second, before you touch it, are you tired? If I don't ask you that question, you interpret that to mean that right now I don't care that much. The moment you sense that I don't care that much, the level of shemitah you don't have.
Why can't you ask can't you assume that the other person is already tahor and rely on that?
So how can I assume that, Nisanel? Even a parush, Mashiach is coming. We will all be parushim. We all want to go into the temple. But just because we are constantly practicing these laws, it doesn't mean we don't become tamei. You have to understand something. I'll give you an example. A woman becomes an ida. It's natural. Her bed becomes an av because it's midras of an ida. Which means that biblically, if I touch the bed of a woman that's an ida, I become a rishon. Biblically, if I touch even chulin, I make it into a sheni. You see, the laws of Tum and Tara, when we're going to practice it, it changes the way we go through life on an external way. But there are many, I just gave you one, there are many dinim. It's like many people, the Alter Rebbe concludes Tanya almost the second to last thing is to learn Hilchas Shabbos. Because if you don't practice and learn, b'shoigig, people break Shabbos. Same thing with Tum and Tara, it's so many halachas. So if I imagine we're both standing together and my shawl falls down, my scarf, and I say, Nisano, please pick it up for me. That's it, Tamei. Now, both of us know that nothing touched it. Hesech hadas means just that. It means you have to be constantly, there's a certain part of your brain that's always like looking around. Is anything Tommy touching it? Could have anything happened? If we lose that, even though when we look backwards we know nothing touched it, doesn't matter. Hesech hadas. Let's go weiter. Halacha number 2. Amar Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram. Nischalfu lo kelim shel Shabbos bekelim shel chol. Huge chiddush. I have Shabbos clothing, as we all should have, something at least for Shabbos special, and Big Day Choil. Even a parush who's careful that no source of tumah should touch their clothing, they would still guard their Big Day Shabbos more than they would guard their Big Day Choil. What does guarding more mean? People should appreciate this. It's the same laws, but they were more, it's like, I give you just a mashal of Gashmias. People that are clean. They don't want their garments to get dirty. But still, when they put on what they consider their fancier suit, they're going to be more mindful. Not a person that doesn't care if the weekday suit gets dirty, but since it's more expensive, there is a higher level of guardianship. I'm just borrowing that mindset when it comes to Tum and Tara. So even though the Parush's mindfulness for weekday clothing suffices to keep it pure, but since he guards his Shabbos clothing on a higher level, and now he actually took out Shabbos clothing, he thought it's weekday clothing, he was only guarding it the way he guards his weekday clothing, that's already called Hesech Hadas. He lowered the standard for these clothing. Wow. And they become Tamei. Halacha number 3. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok. Now, okay, let me just add a nuance. I jumped ahead. This is what I said right now is the real reason behind it. But before we come to the end, the first understanding of this halacha was based on a havamina that's not going to stand, that whenever I am guarding one item, but I think it's item A, the moment it turns out to be item B, that's called hesech hadas. Not because of this higher standard, lower standard. Stop. When you guard one thing, if that's the case, that would mean that if I put my hand into a basket and I think I'm taking out an apple, and I took out an orange, since I was holding on to one item for a moment thinking it's something else, it already had hesech hadas. That's the havamina now. And Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok, according to this understanding, rule number 2 and rule number 3, it should be the same thing. The Gemara is going to address it. Rule number 3, so just to know the names, Yonasan ben Elazar spoke about the shawl. Yonasan ben Amram spoke about that I took out what is big day Shabbos, thinking it's weekday clothing, it automatically becomes tamei. And number 3, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok, it once happened that there were 2 women that, for example, they went to the bathhouse at the same time. And they were both chaveros. Chaveros is the feminine for a chaver. That means that they belong to the people that were very mindful, making sure that none of their person, none of their foods, none of their drinks, none of their kalim have any contact with tumah. And if it does, they know about it. So they both went into the bathhouse, and when they got dressed, they accidentally, each one, put on the garb of the other. That nischalfu lahem kilei mebeis hamerchatz. So again, they were guarding. Each one is guarding, making sure that no tumah touches them, no tumah touches their clothing. But they didn't know that they thought they were wearing their skirt, they were wearing their friend's skirt. And also v'timan. And based on the havamina, the rule number 3 and the rule number 2 is based on the concept that if you're meshamer davar, becheska shehu davar zeh, v'nimsa shehu davar acher, you're guarding an item thinking it's one thing, and it turns out it's something else, even if both belong to you, or in the second case it belongs to someone else, it's not called guarding. See, coming back to Mashiach's coming behesech hadas, now you understand that. You can be thinking about Mashiach the whole time, it can sometimes still be called hesech hadas. There's a certain heightened level of mindfulness that's needed for it to be considered that you're not having hesech hadas. Okay, so now let's go and challenge. And ultimately, we're going to, through these challenges, we will enlighten all of the 3 dinim. Question number 1. Maskav la Rab Oishia, based on the Havamina, that the last 2 dinim, the last 2 out of the 3, is because if I'm guarding item, and I think it's item A, turns out it's item B, that in itself is considered a diversion of attention. If a person sticks their hands into a basket, and they think that you have wheat bread, and to take out paschitim, turned out that, most of the bread was made out of wheat, but there was 1 loaf of bread that was made out of barley. And from when they took it out until when they looked at it, for that second or 2, they thought they're holding on to something else. Are you telling me that any time I think I'm guarding A and it turns out it's B, even though I was guarding it, I was sure nothing Tommy touched it, automatically that's called halachic diversion of attention? It's not logical. And if you're going to argue, yeah, well, that's the rule. Rabbinically, that's the rule. No, it's not the rule. I prove it to you from a braisa. If I have a barrel and I'm assuming that in the barrel there's wine, and it turns out that in the barrel it's oil, then shemen says the braisa tohoira melatame. It will not give off tuma. In other words, just because I had a mistake in identity, I didn't know what's inside, it doesn't negate the fact that I was guarding it. I wasn't relying on your guard, I was guarding it. So I thought it's wine, it turned out it was oil. Doesn't matter. It's the fact that I discover later it was another item doesn't negate the level of Shemitah. Number 1. So the Gemara says, Ula Taimei, hold on. If that's true, and by the way, that's true. But if that's the case, Amos Seifa, why does the Braisa say that in the case that we just mentioned, even though this barrel cannot convey Tumah, but Va'asur Melech oil, but you cannot consume it, why not? So the Gemara is going to answer that. That will be the other big din that we're learning today, as we mentioned in the introduction. Partial guarding. Amazing concept. Amar Rav Yirmiyah, the case of the Braisa was, aside of the fact that you thought it's one item and it turned out to be another item, which we will say is not problematic. But here there was another nuance, another knech, another wrinkle, that ba'omer shematia midavar hametama v'loy midavar hapoisla. Amazing. A person is mindful. I'm very aware of my surroundings. I know what's happening. But there are some times that a person, for whatever reason, says, all I care about is that the item, in our case, it's a food, it's a liquid. I don't want something that's an av to have contact with it. I'm using the words metama. I just want to explain what these words mean. One of the ways the Tanoim hinted to us whether they're speaking about Tuma on a level of a Rishon or Tuma on a level of a Sheni is that, like we mentioned, if something becomes Tuma, it acquires Tuma, and it's able to also convey Tuma, that item is called Tame. If something acquires Tuma, but it's already such a weak level of Tuma that it can no longer convey the Tuma, it's called Pasel. In the world of Chulin, the end of the line is a Sheni. So like this, if an Av touches the oil, that's the case over here, or the wine, which means the wine or the oil will become a Rishon. A Rishon is able to convey Tuma even in Chulin for one step down. We call that Tameh. So when it says, I was guarding it, midavar hametama, that's another way of saying I was guarding my barrel that no Av should have contact with it. Because if an Av would have a contact with it, then it would become Tameh, because it would become a Rishon. A Rishon can make even Chulin into a Sheni. But I said, V'loy midavar hapoisla. I was not keeping it away from a Rishon. See, if a Rishon were to have contact with the barrel of wine or oil, it would make it impure. But it would only make it impure in a level of a Sheni. A Sheni cannot make Chulin into a Shlishi, so it would be called Pasel. In other words, Rabbi Yirmiyah is introducing a concept that even though there's a person that has no Hesach Hadas, all of their antennas are up. Nothing has, but if I am only focused on, I don't want an Av to have contact with it, Midrabanan, we presume a Rishon had contact with it. And that's why the Braisa says that that barrel cannot be eaten. Because since you were not guarding it from a Rishon, maybe it's a Sheni. Now parenthetically, I just want you to know that biblically, I can eat something that's a Sheni. I could eat something that's a Sheni. But then we learned rabbinic laws that if I eat food that's Tameh, remember that? I myself become Tameh. They were concerned that Kohanim, while eating a Sheni, while it's in their mouth, would put Truma in their mouth. We had that whole sugya. All of these are rabbinic laws on top of rabbinic laws, on top of rabbinic laws, which is something unusual, basically only by Tum and Tara. In most other cases of the Torah, we don't make double rabbinic laws. Not in the case of Tum and Tara. Okay, so the
Gemara. How does he know he's guarding it from an Av versus a Rishon? How is he differentiating them? How does he recognize?
So, Kevan, we are not practicing enough these dinim. But once we are so into the dinim of Tum and Tara, and we know the many sources of Av, that's all I was focusing on. That's all I'm focusing on. Even though I'm focused on it, and I can tell you post facto, nothing had contact. We don't care. We don't care what I said post facto. We need that while I'm guarding it, what am I guarding it from? And we need for me to guard it from any source of Tumah. And if I'm guarding it only from a higher level of Tumah and not from a lower, that's called Hesach Hadas. Wow. So the Gemara wants to know, where do we find such a concept? Umi ika neterusa lapalga? Is there part guarding? Mar says, yeah, in. And here's the case. Ve'atanya, this is not a question. This ve'atanya is benichusa. That's a proof. It says in a Braisa, hoishet yoda basal. It's just an example. Person is sticking their hands into a basket. We're speaking about a basket of figs. It's also important to note that for what we are learning, his hands going in it is not relevant. But there's other pratim of that Braisa. But we're going to focus on the fact that I have on my back a basket of figs. The basket is on my shoulders. And in the basket, there is also a shovel. They used to press their figs together. And when you would eat those figs, you would need a utensil to properly break them apart. So, unbeknownst to me, there was also this type of keli, this type of knife, they called it a shovel, that was inside the basket. Now the carrier of this basket, he was mindful, making sure that no source of tumah touches the basket and the figs in the basket, but he didn't know that there is a shovel, so he wasn't mindful regarding the shovel. Says the Braisa that, you know what? I mean, this is a different type of partial guarding it, but we're going to get to the exact soon. Hasal tar, the basket and the figs remain pure, but the v'amagreifa is tamei. Now, by the way, this is another application of partial guarding. You see, it's different. Before we were speaking about I'm guarding all of it from an av, not from a sheni. Here we're speaking about partial guarding. I don't even know that there is another utensil in the basket. So I wasn't focused b'chlal on that utensil. Now hold on. Now we got a problem. The problem is, it asks the Gemara, how can the basket or the figs remain tar? Once you're telling me that rabbinically the utensil is tamei, so why wouldn't the utensil make tamei the figs? To tamei amagreifa l'sal. The magreifa that now is tamei, again rabbinically, because you had hesach hadas, you didn't even know that it's there. Why won't that impurify the basket? The basket. So the Gemara tells her, no, ein kelim and tama keli. Generally, a keli cannot be an av. There are exceptions. A keli is only tamei on a level of a rishon. A rishon cannot make a keli into a sheni. Biblically, there is no tumas sheni by kelim. But still asks the Gemara, but biblically food could become a sheni. V'latami masha b'sal. Once the magreifa, once the utensil, once the shovel is tamei rabbinically, why doesn't it automatically make the figs tamei? So to answer that question, now it's mamish partial guarding. Amar Avina, the case is ba'omer, the person says that shemartiv midavar shemetamatoi, I was guarding even the shovel. It wasn't that I didn't know there's a shovel. I was only making sure that an av doesn't touch the shovel. If an av would have touched the shovel becomes tummy, because then it's a rishon, and it can make chulin into a sheni. But I wasn't guarding it midavar hapoisli. That means that I wasn't specifically making sure that a rishon doesn't touch the keli. Now, by the way, a rishon, like we just mentioned, if a rishon were to touch the keli biblically will never become tummy. Rabbinically, if liquid that's a rishon touches the keli does become tummy. So there was a certain type that's called real. That's the exact concept of partial guarding. So bottom line is that we proved from the cases we gave above that if I'm guarding item A, and it turns out that I was guarding item B, as long as I was guarding it from all sources of Tumah, it is considered good guarding. So our initial understanding of rule number 2 and rule number 3 is wrong. So mikomakim kashem. So we have to explain now the second and the third rule. And now, va'oid, the way we'll learn the Gemara is going to ask a question which will make the first rule also problematic. The rule of Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, of someone's shul falling and they ask someone else to pick it up. And all of that again will further clarify these 3 dinim. What's the question which will be on all dinim, even on the first? It says in a Braisa, there was a woman that once came in front of the Tana Rabbi Yishmael, and she tells him, Rebbe, beged ze'araktiv b'tara, I wove a garment. Now, a couple of interesting dinim. Not every keli is susceptible to becoming tamei. A utensil that's not a finished product cannot become tamei even if the worst source of tamei had halachic contact. Now, a keli, for example, when you are weaving a garment, prior to it reaching the minimum size of three finger breadths on 3 finger breadths, it's not considered, not even good for a patch. It's bechlal not a keli. So when you weave, just to tell you interestingly, in the beginning of the weaving, you don't have to be mindful. But from a certain point on, you got to make sure that no source of tumah touches it. This woman didn't have that level of mindfulness while she was weaving it. But she says, now that I finished weaving it, I'm looking back, I'm thinking back, I remember everything that happened, and I know that no tumah touched it. In other words, she wasn't mindful while she was weaving it, but she's confident now that the whole thing took a minute. So she wasn't mindful for that 1 minute. And when she finishes, let me think. Okay, no one was in the room, no one spoke to me, nothing happened, nothing changed. I know for sure that nothing tummy touched it. Is it good or not? So Rabbi Shmuel tells her, okay, if you were not mindful while you were weaving it, maybe it became tummy. And he began to ask questions. From all the questions that he asked, she remembered that Rebbe, there was another woman here who was a nida. She was pulling the same spool of thread. Now, guys, a nida is an av. And when she moves something, even indirectly, it's called tumas hesed. Everything that was moved by her koyach becomes tamei. So what? Now, she wasn't paying attention to that detail. And when she thought back, she didn't remember that detail because no one directly had any contact with the thread that she was using. But she remembered that a nida did hesed. She moved the spool, and therefore the beged is takatoming. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Kama Gedolim Divrei Chachamim. Now you see how important it is to follow the words of the sages. When they said that at the time you have to have guarding. Shmira is not looking backwards. Only if at the time you are involved touching, making, carrying, then you're taught. We trust everyone as long as they were mindful b'shas maisa. But post facto was never good enough. Always tamei. Another story. Shuv maisa be'isha achas. Shabbos l'fnei Rabbi Shmuel. And Amar Eloi. Here's the case. Rebbe mapa araktia. I was weaving a cloth. Bitara, same thing. I finished making the cloth. I'm looking back. There was no tumah here. But while I was weaving it, I wasn't that mindful. So again, he began to ask questions. She remembered, Rebbe, like this. Nima nifsikali, there was a thread in the cloth that broke prior to it having the minimum size of 3 finger breadths. I was then a nida, and I used my saliva to mend it, to fix it. But I knew then that since the cloth is so little, it's not halachically considered a beged yet. But you know what? There's a possibility, says Rashi, that the saliva didn't fully dry. And later, when she went to the mikvah, she was taught. And when she finished the size of the cloth, maybe some of that saliva was moist enough for it still to be considered saliva, which, by the way, is an av, and the whole beged is tamei. I tied it with my mouth again. Maybe some saliva was there. So again, Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Kama Gedolim, the first wide line, Divrei Chachamim, Shoyo Emrim, Beliba L'Shamra Toit, Ein Beliba L'Shamra Tamei. So how was this posed a new question, the way the Rishonim explain? Point is that we accept that post facto, looking backwards and saying, I'm certain that in the past no source of tummy touched it, is not accepted. But if B'libay l'shamrei b'shas maisa, then it's enough. B'libay l'shamrei, if you are making sure it's not tummy, then it's guarded from tuma. So this really is also a question on Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, which is rule number 1. My shul fell and I asked you to pick it up. Why would it not be good? So let's go. Bish loymel Rab Lazar ber Rab Tzadok. Rab Lazar ber Rab Tzadok, my friends, is case number 3. Right, the 2 women that each one put on the garb of the other in the bathhouse. Kol achas v'achas imeres chaverti eshes ha'ma'aretz. Maybe the reason why it's tamei is because no one knows. The case was no one knew the other. One woman wasn't certain that the other was a chaverta. Maybe she married into a family of amaratzim who are not careful, making sure their things don't become tamei. And therefore, the moment they became aware, this garment belongs to a wife of an amaretz, the owner doesn't care whether it's tired or tamei, you lose automatically that level of mindfulness. And that lack of focused making sure no source of tummy touches it, that rabbinically makes the item tummy. That will be the reason. In this Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram, which is case number 2, right, I have Big Day Shabbos. I put them on thinking the Big Day Choil, Nami. This is what we explained when we learned it in the beginning. 3 lines from the bottom. Kiven the Kalim the Shabbos Avilu Shimmer Tvei. Since I guard my big day Shabbos more than big day Choil, even though I guard my weekday garments from Tuma, and that's a valid guarding, but my Shabbos garbs, I am even more mindful. So concerning the garb, I lowered the standard. Here is where I thought about what we mentioned about the Mashiach comes behesach hadas. In other words, even by us, even people that the Rebbe succeeded in educating us that we should always be mindful about Mashiach, there are different levels. Sometimes we are more mindful, sometimes we are less mindful. The moment there is a lowering in that mindfulness, that's called hesach hadas. Ella, the second to last line, halacha number 1, Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar. Why is it that if I saw, I'm guarding my shul fell, I asked you, please pick it up. You picked it up in front of me. Why would it become tamei? Navid luhushim would be day the chavre. I am watching it. It's not that I didn't see it for a moment. The owner was in visual contact with that item the whole time. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, here we have the 2 rules that we read in Rashi. These are rules. Yeah, we have to just let it sit a little bit. Rule is chazaka ein adam mishamer ma shebiyat chaveri. The moment a keli, a utensil, food or drink is in your hand, I am already not guarding it on the level to say that I didn't have hesach hadas. I guard that which is in my hand. If it's in no one's hand, but it's in my possession, if it's in my home, I'm also guarding it. The moment it's in someone else's hand, they are the ones that need to guard it, not me. And now let's add step number 2, which we read out in the Rashi. I spoke out from the Rashi before. Even if, when I asked you to pick it up, even if you are a parush, but the fact that I didn't ask you whether you're tamei or tar, my lack of asking that question triggers in your mind, in the one who's doing the favor's mind, he didn't ask me if I'm tar or tamei. Must mean that right now he doesn't care. Maybe he's also tamei, maybe the shul is anyways tamei. Why wouldn't he ask me that? So his understanding that the owner doesn't care also creates the fact that he doesn't have the proper shimur. Hesach hadas. You got a hesach hadas. One second, you're telling me there's a rule that ein adam mishamer mashu b'yad chaveiroi, which by the way will stand? I got a problem with that. V'loi v'hatanya daf chav amid beis. It says in a brayso, hareish oya chamarov, if a person has donkey drivers or payalova workers, and they are working for the principal, so Reuven has chamarav or payalov, and tu'unim taharais, and they are carrying the taras of Reuven. Okay, the case here will be, let's say they're carrying barrels of wine. This will be an important nuance. I want to just say another given rule that earthenware utensils don't become tamei even if a source of tumah had contact with it, if the contact was only on the outside of the utensil. All earthenware utensils can only absorb contract tumah if the source of tumah went inside its airspace. This detail will be important. So let's say Reuven is the owner. Reuven is someone who's a parush. He has a barrel of wine, and up until now he was guarding it. There's no hesach hadas. He gave it to a donkey driver. He gave it to a worker. Now, even if the donkey driver is tamei, just by him carrying or grabbing, having contact with the barrel, it does nothing to the barrel. He will only potentially make the barrel and the contents tamei if he puts his hand inside of it. So says the Braisa, even if the owner became distant from this donkey driver or from another type of porter or worker, even more than a mil, far away, nevertheless, that which is in the barrel remains pure. In other words, like we mentioned, it's earthenware. The only way it would become tamei is by the donkey driver sticking his hand inside of it. Question is, why don't we have that suspicion? And l'chayda, the answer is because the owner is guarding it. Now, just to know, a mill, 3,000 feet, you can see So that maybe the reason, the question is, why doesn't the contents become tummy? Because the owner is looking at it. So we don't accept the rule that I don't halachically guard that which is in your hands. That will be the kasha. Well, let's finish learning the Braisa. But if the owner tells this worker, L'chu, go ahead, and I'll catch up later. Now we say, Kivin shenes almo ein of mehem, the moment we lost visual contact, then tohiros of tameis. And now the question is, Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. No, it's based on Rabbi Yechanan's statement, which will stand, that Ein Adam Mishamer Ma Shebiyat Chaveiroi, then even in the Reisha it should be Tamei. If not for Rabbi Yechanan, I understand the difference. The Reisha must be speaking about a case where I can see it. So I saw that my workers did not stick their hands in. But now we're saying it doesn't make a difference. That was the halacha. If you pick up my shawl in front of me, I'm also watching it. It's not good. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. I don't guard what's in your hand. I don't guard what's in your hand. The only reason, in the case of the Reisha, why even though the poyel or the donkey driver is carrying it, it's not tamei, because prior to me, the owner, giving my worker that barrel, I saw to it that my worker went to the mikveh. So even if he would have touched the wine, he cannot make it tamei. So I don't guard what's in your hand. But the worker is able to guard it, because it's in his hand, from someone else. So the issue is never whether the worker touched it or not. The case is only b'metayir chamar of payal of lakach. Now, by the way, it's not enough that I took you to the mikveh, because maybe the poyel was previously tamei to tumas meis. So it means that I saw to it that he was sprinkled with the third day and on the seventh day, like oy gewalt. The worker got paid a lot of money for that, but that was part of the preconditions. No, there was never a fear that the one holding it himself touched it. Even if he did, it wouldn't matter. But there is still, but there is still an issue. Maybe someone else touched it. And now you'll see the difference between the Reish and the Seifa. So hold on, if that's the case, we know that he's pure, so even in the Seifa, it should remain pure. So the Gemara says, he is pure, but someone else can touch it. And don't forget, Chevra, that people that were Amaratzim, they were lax. So if someone else were to come, the worker is a mensch. The worker would ask his friend, are you tired? And he would say, yeah. And the Amaretz would trust him. It's like many people say, I'm kosher. It's not about trusting them. They think they're kosher. Their house is, God forbid, not kosher because they don't know enough halachas. Same thing happened then. They all meant well. It's this Amaretz, this worker might allow someone else to take some wine out, not because they don't care, because the Amaretz felt that the other person is tahar. Someone else might touch it. Ein Amaretz makpid al maga chaveiroi. He doesn't care that much because he'll ask him and he'll rely on what he answers. So if that's the case, so again, what's the difference in the Reisha? Why is it that in the Reisha the contents remain pure? So the answer is, and now you get the mill. By the way, people can see far away if there's nothing obstructing your vision. I can be within a couple of feet of you, but if you are on one side of the wall and I'm on the other side of the wall, then there'll be moments that we cannot see each other. But, if we are within a certain distance, even if, here in the case, the worker knows that the owner cannot see him this second, but he might come from the other angle. When you're going on a road, he says, well, if you'll be coming down the road, I'll hear your hooves of the horse, but you might come from a side street. As long as you are in a place where the worker knows that you might just appear, he'll make sure that no one else touches it. That he knows, because of their not being that far apart, so it's more than a mil, but there's a possibility he knows that, the owner might appear. Maybe if he's coming from north, I'll know prior, I'll hear. But if he comes from the west, I won't know that. So the Seifa also, he also might show up. And that knowledge that the owner might show up will prevent him from allowing anyone else to touch it. So the Gemara says that since the owner told him, you go ahead and I'll catch up, he basically told the worker that I'm not immediately behind you. So the worker mismach somchadatayu, so he's more lax, and if another colleague of his will come and will want to touch the contents inside, and none of this is illegal. There were deals there's a certain amount of my worker can consume a little bit of the product, or the worker feels he'll sell a cup of wine and then he'll tell the owner and he'll give the money to him, and let that other person put the cup and take out some wine, take out some oil, we are afraid that happened. So, and bottom line is that there is a chazaka that even if I see you, the moment my item is in your hand, I have hesach hadas. But you have the ability to guard my item. But when there is a scenario where you might not guard my item, like in our case, I didn't ask you whether you're tired or tamei, I just asked you pick up my jacket that fell down. So you also don't guard it properly. And that lacks of guardianship is called a diversion of attention. It's called hesach hadas. And the moment there's hesach hadas, that item rabbinically becomes tamei. Wow. And with this we say, Hadran Aloch Ein Darshin, that we concluded the second chapter, and God willing, in next class, we're going to start the third and the final, not only Perek of Chagiga, but the final Perek of the entire Seder Moed.